After her father's funeral, a little girl was kicked out by stepmother. The rain had barely stopped falling after the funeral when a small girl, clutching her father's photograph, was told to leave the only home she had ever known. Her stepmother's cold eyes held no mercy, and the black car that once carried her father's body now drove away, leaving silence behind. With no family, no protection, and nowhere to go, she walked into the unknown, tears soaking her tiny hands. But just when her world seemed shattered beyond repair, fate placed her in the path of a man whose wealth was vast, but whose heart was even bigger. Please take a moment and subscribe. Our channel, her name was Lena. Just 9 years old, with eyes too big for her face and a spirit too fragile for the cruelty that awaited her. She had been close to her father, who raised her with warmth after her mother's death. For Lena, her father was her world, the man who read her bedtime stories, held her hand during storms, and promised she'd never be alone. But life is rarely fair. When illness took him away, Lena's fragile world collapsed. At his funeral, people whispered in black suits and somber dresses, while Lena sat silently in the front row, gripping the frame of her father's photo as though it was the only thing tethering her to life. Her stepmother, Vanessa, stood tall beside the casket, face powdered, lips pressed thin, showing no tears. She had married Lena's father just 2 years ago, but her affection had always been reserved for the wealth and comfort the marriage provided, not for the little girl who came with it. When the funeral ended, Lena thought she would at least return home to her room filled with stuffed animals and books her father had read to her. But at the mansion's front doors, Vanessa blocked her path. With a sharp glare, she told Lena she no longer belonged there. Bags were thrown at her feet, just a small suitcase filled with clothes, and the heavy door shut behind her, leaving the child outside in the cold. She had just buried her father, and now she had lost her home too. The street was silent except for the occasional car splashing through puddles. Lena dragged her suitcase, each step heavier than the last. The world felt enormous, and she, so small, felt swallowed by it. She had no relatives, no one who could take her in. Her father had been everything. As she wandered, she thought of the nights he had told her stories of courage. Even when the world seems darkest, he once said, remember, there is always light waiting somewhere. But how could she believe that now, when her own stepmother had turned her away without a trace of kindness? Meanwhile, Vanessa sat comfortably inside the mansion, sipping wine. She hadn't shed a tear for her late husband. In her mind, Lena was nothing but an inconvenience, a reminder of a man she had married only for his wealth. Now that he was gone, she intended to enjoy everything he had left behind, without sharing a penny with a child. But there was something Vanessa didn't know. When Lena's father had been alive, he had secretly prepared something for his daughter. He had confided in a trusted old friend, a man of vast wealth and influence, someone who had promised to step in if anything ever happened. That man's name was Alexander Reed, a millionaire businessman who had once owed his life to Lena's father. Years ago, during a fire at a construction site, Lena's father had saved Alexander from near death, risking his own life. Ever since then, Alexander carried a deep debt of gratitude. As fate would have it, Alexander had attended the funeral. He had noticed Lena sitting alone, shoulders trembling, ignored by the very woman who should have cared for her. When he saw her walk away from the mansion with a suitcase dragging behind her, his heart clenched. He knew instantly what had happened. That evening, Lena sat on a park bench, shivering as the night grew colder. She hugged her father's photo, whispering promises to be strong, though her tiny body shook from hunger and fear. A sleek black car pulled up nearby, and a tall figure stepped out. Alexander Reed. His expensive suit was untouched by the rain, but his expression was heavy with concern. Slowly, he approached the little girl. "Your father once saved me," he said gently, "and I promised him I would always protect you." Though Lena didn't fully understand, something about his voice carried safety. For the first time since the funeral, she felt a flicker of warmth. The next morning, Alexander marched to the mansion with Lena beside him. Vanessa, lounging in silk, looked startled to see them. Her confidence faltered when Alexander's voice cut through the air, stern and commanding. He revealed that Lena's father had entrusted him with documents, legal papers securing Lena's rightful inheritance, the mansion, the accounts, the properties, everything Vanessa thought she owned, belonged not to her, but to Lena. The color drained from Vanessa's face. The servants who had once obeyed her now turned their eyes toward Lena, who clutched Alexander's hand. In one decisive moment, the power shifted. The woman who had cast out a grieving child was now stripped of the very wealth she craved. Life changed for Lena, not instantly, but steadily. With Alexander as her guardian, she no longer walked the streets alone. She was given not just wealth, but something far more precious: care, stability, and protection. Alexander never replaced her father, but he honored his memory by ensuring Lena grew up safe and loved. Vanessa, on the other hand, disappeared from the mansion. Stripped of influence and fortune, she faded into obscurity. Her cruelty had cost her everything. Lena, with time, learned to smile again. She grew into a young woman who carried her father's kindness in her heart and Alexander's guidance in her steps. She used her inheritance not to live in vanity, but to help children who had lost their families. Children who knew the same pain she once endured. The story of a grieving girl cast out by her stepmother became one of hope, resilience, and unexpected redemption. And so the question remains: in a world where cruelty often goes unchecked, what would you do if fate gave you the chance to protect the most vulnerable? Because sometimes, one act of kindness, one promise kept, can change the course of a child's entire life.